Hello everyone, welcome to Module 4. We are looking at the concept of multicultural education and culturally responsive pedagogy in this module. These are two concepts that are usually used interchangeably, but they are not necessarily interchangeable. Multicultural education, you can see multicultural education as the theory that guides education of diverse students or education for social justice. Culturally responsive pedagogy is the classroom application of that idea. Instead of culturally responsive pedagogy, you may be seeing other concepts in the literature, things such as culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally congruent pedagogy, culturally sensitive pedagogy. These usually refer to same types of practices, but they have different terminology. But the multicultural education and the other set of terms, culturally relevant, responsive, they are not necessarily the same things, but ultimately they all talk about an education that is based upon the principles of social justice, an education that is fair and equitable. This is what we are going to look at in Module 4. What we have studied so far, we have looked at culture, we have looked at the cultural structure of the United States, we have looked at immigrants, and now we have an understanding that the United States is actually quite a diverse society, and actually diversity is increasing, not only in society but in schools too. And the increasing diversity that you see in schools is not met with an increase in teacher force in the United States. So there's kind of a cultural gap between classrooms or students and teachers, and I do not mean this in a negative way. Culturally, about 87% of teachers in the United States are white and mostly females, and the cultural diversity in the classrooms at the student level is a whole lot different from that. Now, and some of the readings you had in the earlier modules gave you the idea that even specifically in the South, diverse students are becoming the majority. So things are changing. So we have to be prepared for this. That's number one. Number two, we have been talking about an achievement gap in American classrooms, and that achievement gap has been very persistent. And the achievement gap refers to mainly based upon standardized tests, but the achievement gap between black and Hispanic students mainly versus white students. And of all the minority students, Asian students seem to be okay academically, but there is an achievement gap between white students and black and Hispanic students, and that achievement gap has been there for quite some time. And one of the goals of multicultural education is to close that gap, but that is not the main goal. The main goal is actually to provide all students, regardless of their backgrounds, with an education that's equitable based upon principles of social justice. Now, I want to talk about some of the readings you have in this module. We have some chapters from our spring textbook, and I want to emphasize one of the readings especially, and this is a chapter by Gloria Ladson-Billings, and this is a chapter about culturally relevant pedagogy. This is a very important chapter. One of the reasons is because it's written by Gloria Ladson-Billings. She's in the area of culturally relevant pedagogy or critical race theory or multicultural education. She's one of the top names. She knows what she's talking about, and the chapter is really well written. I would like you to pay special attention to it, but I just want to give you a very, very brief summary of what she's talking about. And she will talk about what culturally relevant pedagogy looks like in the classroom in this chapter. Therefore, the information is extremely relevant to you. And she talks about three main components of culturally relevant pedagogy in this chapter. And the first one is, she calls it academic excellence. What she means by that, when you're teaching culturally diverse students, you are to expect high standards from them as you would from other students. You are not to feel bad for them, you're not to hold hands, but you are to hold them to high expectations. You are to expect academic excellence from them, and that goes to the issue of teacher expectations, and we know since 1970s or so, teacher expectations play a big role in students' learning. Teachers do communicate their expectations knowingly, unknowingly, and students respond to those expectations. Or what Gloria Ladson-Billings is saying, that teachers are to hold high expectations for all students, including students of minority backgrounds. And these high expectations do not necessarily have to be in just academic learning areas. It goes into everything, including discipline practices. The second component of that chapter, the second component she talks about is cultural competence. What she means by cultural competence is that teachers need to teach culturally diverse students the tools, the content that they have to learn to be successful in society, to fully function in society. And if that means that they have to learn white ways of, and I do not use these terms in a negative way. If they have to learn white ways of acting or behaving in society, then teachers have to teach them that, because they are going to need those tools to be successful. For example, they will have to speak and write in proper English to get a good job, then then they have to be taught that. So that's her second component. And the third one is quite interesting, and she calls this sociopolitical consciousness. Sociopolitical consciousness is the ability to recognize, reflect upon, social issues, injustices, etc., and using these types of issues in the classroom for teaching students. And this is something that this type of consciousness is something that you need to have as a teacher so that you can teach it. And it's not something that you have or you do not have. It's something that develops. It's more like a process. You have sociopolitical consciousness, but you will gain more and more and more, and there's not a stop to it. So this is what she talks about. These are the three main components of culturally relevant pedagogy, and teachers who apply these three components, in her view, will be quite successful in implementing it. One of the other readings in our module is a book review, and this is a review on a book that was written in 1990s, and the book talked about 5 different approaches to multicultural education. I chose a book review because I want you to have a general sense of what these 5 approaches were, and you will see it in the reading. I want to talk about the 5th approach. The 5 approaches are educating exceptionally and culturally different, single group studies, cultural pluralism, multicultural education, and education that is multicultural and social reconstructionist. The 5th one is the one I want to talk about, education that is multicultural and social reconstructionist. And this approach to multicultural education requires that you teach content from multiple perspectives, so you're inclusive of different histories, different contributions of different people, different problems of different people. And this is much like multicultural education. The social reconstructionist part is that you actually go beyond this type of teaching, and you actually include some important concepts consciously. Purposefully, you include important concepts, big social concepts like sexism and racism and discrimination, and you want your students to learn about these things in school in hopes that they will actually do something about it when they grow up. If they learn about these issues, if they learn about the injustices in society, then they might grow up and do something about it. Now, there is a video in the module called Eye of the Storm, and this is a really well-known video. Some of you may have seen it, and this is a video from 1980s. It's a video that's talking about a social experiment that was conducted in a classroom in Iowa, and the name of the teacher is Jane Elliott, and I'm not going to talk much about it because I would like you to see the video. But in this social experiment, Jane Elliott, the teacher, divides her classroom into blue-eyed and blue-eyed and brown-eyed people. And she assigns children certain privileges and punishments according to their designation of blue eye or brown eye. So this is an example of social reconstructionist teaching. You are bringing race and prejudice into your teaching consciously to teach children about inequalities in society. So that's a perfect example of teaching for social reconstructions. Now, the readings from spring textbook will supplement these other readings really well. As usual, we have our discussions, and because our last week of the class will be a short week, I'm going to make this Module 4 and Module 5 available at the same time, but the rules will apply. I would like you to respond to my prompt by Thursday and then respond to each other by Sunday of our module. Let's see. I think this is all I can think of right now. As usual, we have Ask the Instructor forum available to you. If you have any questions, do not feel shy to ask. I will do my best to respond to you as quickly as I can. I hope you enjoyed this module, and I will talk to you when I make the video for Module 5. So, goodbye.